Even though I'm incredibly grateful for Chloe Robinson's offer to introduce me, I'd like to take this time to introduce to you a very special mentor and friend of mine who, along with Mr. Casartano, is chief among those who has supported and empowered me to be who I am as a chaplain and as a school leader. His name is the Reverend Tony Jarvis. He was my professor and an advisor and a beloved friend for my last years of seminary. But before he became a professor at Yale, Reverend Jarvis was for 30 years the headmaster of Roxbury Latin School in Boston, the oldest school in continuous existence in North America. And like Millbrook, non-denominational from the start. So I use the words of some of my colleagues at Yale, that though he held many positions in his life, he was at heart a leader with a clear, straightforward message. He taught that the most important quality of a good school person is to know and love your students. Doesn't that sound familiar? But he was not at all a sentimental person. He could be irascible and opinionated and curmudgeonly. And he was unapologetic about his beliefs and forthright in his advocacy for studying sacred scriptures as a powerful force in educating young people. He taught us the power in a commitment to faith, as the current head of Roxbury Latin, Ms. Kelly Brennan, states. And she goes on to say that Tony Jarvis was an amazing, transformative force for good, a once-in-a-lifetime teacher, leader, and friend. We will not see his kind again. As you may surmise by my use of the past tense, Reverend Jarvis died on Sunday after a long battle with cancer. So my talk is dedicated to him and to his legacy. So this one's for you, Tony. Now that we're in the school year, I can tell that you've gotten into the groove. Those of you who were new aren't so new anymore. I'm still working on my Quizlet with the help of the Clarkies to get to know all of you. But you know where you're going, and you know what you need to do. And the veterans amongst you, you've reconnected. You've seen how you've changed and grown, and you've made some new friends. So we're recreating ourselves. This is what we do in boarding schools. Year after year, we recreate. As we grow in our relationships and academic work, as you grow athletically and academically and artistically, and in your identity as leaders in the community. And all of us, your parents, your teachers and coaches, and dorm parents and administration, we put a lot of resources into developing your identity as responsible and engaged leaders. You're our future. We want you to be empowered to go out into the world and to make a difference, to be successful. But the funny thing is, the ethos of boarding schools, like Millbrook, is grounded in something countercultural to the normative definition of success. Instead of seeking celebrity and entitlement, we want you to be the kind of leaders who live to serve rather than to live for personal gain. People can be divided into roughly two groups, says leadership expert Rob Asgar: guests and hosts. He believes that many people seek positions of authority because they think this will make them the guest of honor at a whole series of an endless series of banquets and speaking engagements. But the opposite is true. If you're a leader, he writes, you're not the guest of honor. You're the host of the party. And there's a certain mindset that goes along with being a good host. Hosts are willing to play the role of providing everyone else with the best possible experience. They have a warm, inviting spirit. They are outward focused and more likely to compliment other people rather than seeking compliments themselves. Just as Reverend Jarvis unapologetically turned to sacred texts for his moral compass, his confidence, and his strength as a leader, so do I. And just as he turned to the scriptures of the Judeo-Christian and indirectly the Muslim texts, so do I. It's who I am, and it's something for you to learn about me and my training and my tradition. So I'm going to share with you a couple of stories, one from the New Testament of the Christian Bible and one from the Hebrew Bible and the Quran. The first is about this man Jesus, this teacher, this rabbi, who was constantly teaching and guiding his students, mainly through his actions. And in one case, a story told by the writer Matthew, towards the end of his life, he was trying to explain to those who were following him, you need to know that I'm going to be arrested, I'm going to be put on trial, and I'm going to be executed. And then I will rise again. And he said this to help them anticipate that they are going to have to take over his role as leaders and as guides of his teachings about God. And so how did his disciples react? Well, they kind of brushed over the idea of he's going to rise because they certainly could not wrap their heads around that, nor could many people at that time. And they started arguing about who was going to be the first in line, who was going to be at the top of the hierarchy, who was going to be the leader of everyone else. So Jesus tolerated the arguing for a little bit before he interrupted them by saying, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. So to him, people who occupy authority positions in the community do not sit in seats of honor at an endless series of dinner parties. Instead, they find themselves serving others. They find themselves at breakfast check-in or as waiters and dishwashers and up in the middle of the night with a homesick third former. They end up acting as hosts to the very least of their brothers and sisters, a role Jesus illustrates by then placing a little child in the midst of the students and saying, think of Avery Allen, whoever welcomes one child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. Jesus teaches that we lead like hosts, not like guests. And unfortunately, we often forget this in our current culture, and this is not to blame, it's just true. When seeking out and joining a new community or coming back after summer break, whether it's here at Millbrook or even visiting a college, it's a cultural habit to behave like a guest. We look for our friends, or we look for people who might be our friends, and we check out the dorms and the dining hall and maybe even the chapel and decide whether we like it or dislike it. Kind of like what we do with messaging on Instagram and Snapchat and even texting. There's this constant stream of assessing and liking and measuring and monitoring whether we're happy or disappointed in the look of something. Sort of how a guest operates, searching for ways to feel more comfortable and to be given a place at the table, so to speak. How different would it be for us to think of ourselves as hosts, all of us? How about if we're focused primarily on finding a place at the table for others? Forget about what other people think of me or what they're doing for me. What am I doing for others around me? It's a countercultural awareness that steers clear of this constant stream of assessing and responding in judgment. It's a kind of awareness that empowers us to get outside of ourselves and gets us to greet people at the door and to actually seek people out that we might like to get to know. Think about when you first came to Millbrook, whether it was a month ago or 3 years ago, when you were feeling a bit like a guest, invited to be part of this but not quite belonging. Can you remember someone who reached out to you? You who were feeling pretty vulnerable, pretty awkward, and maybe terrified. Who was it that made you feel less terrified, more like yourself, more like things would be okay staying here? And what did that person do to make you feel that way? Think about it for just a moment. As hosts, we can't spend too much time being concerned about how we fit in or how we look, because we have to be concerned about the well-being of others. The focus is on providing our guests with the best possible experience. But the funny thing about this leadership style, and there are a whole lot of you that already know this, I've seen it countless times already this year. The funny thing about this kind of leadership style is that it is incredibly freeing and energizing. And it gives you even more confidence rather than being draining. It is not a form of self-neglect. It is not a form of denigration. It's a form of empowerment. From a scriptural perspective, when one considers the well-being of others first, the teachings promise that we will come face to face with holiness, with the sacred, with peace, with a kind of power that dwells within us. In the stories of hospitality in sacred texts, God, or the mystery of the divine, or the power that is beyond ourselves, is present in some surprising and really incredible ways. The second story I reference is about Abraham, and I don't mean Abe Islas. I mean the father of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths. In the book of Genesis from the Torah and the Old Testament, and from Surah 11 from the Quran, Abraham is camping out by the oaks of Mamre, sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looks up and sees 3 men standing there. Is he surprised? No doubt. A little freaked out? Probably. They're strangers. They outnumber him, and he has no way of knowing if they are friends or enemies. But Abraham doesn't go for his weapon to defend himself. Instead, something possesses him to decide to play the role of host. He runs to meet them, and he begs them to stay. He offers them water and bread and a shady spot to rest. And so they consider his offer and say, all right, do as you have said. So Abraham bends over backwards to meet the needs of his guests. He runs into the tent, asks his wife Sarah to make some cakes. He has his best calf slaughtered and cooked and prepares a beautiful meal, serves it to the strangers, and then goes off and stands under a tree while they eat to be able to respond to their every need. Imagine if this is how you were treated when you first came to Millbrook as a 3rd or 4th former, and by the most visible leader of the school, a prefect or a dorm leader or whatever. And I don't mean that you would want them to run at you when you first arrived and beg you to stay, but if they walked you to dinner that first night, or made sure you weren't left sitting alone at a meal, or made sure you knew where to sit at a forum, or clued you in on how long it would take to get from K Hall or Burton to the zoo. Just imagine that in one of those first days. So who are these 3 men that Abraham hosts? The scriptures leave their exact identity a little mysterious. Genesis tells us they are the Lord. Some scholars say that the 3 are God and 2 angels. The New Testament letter to the Hebrews calls them angels, and the Quran says simply that they are angels. But no matter which interpretation you buy into or create for yourself, Abraham acts as a host to total strangers, and his hospitality puts him in touch with something holy. In all of sacred texts and spiritual traditions, this idea of serving others, children, new students, total strangers, feeding them, providing comfort and reassurance, and welcome and common ground is ever present. From the loving kindness of the Buddha, to Bridget of Gale, to Kuan Yin, to Lakshmi, to Abraham, to Jesus, to Muhammad. All point to the reality that when we act as hosts to other people, we come face to face with light, with energy, with love. We all have a unique opportunity as members of this great community to be hosts to each other and to the communities around us. because this is what we must do day in and day out. We live together intentionally, developing our best selves so that we can become leaders in whatever facet of life you can imagine. What a privilege. And yet, the most enriching and challenging, the most holy and meaningful way that this happens is through our awareness of the vulnerabilities and needs of everyone around us. You live with each other through your worst moments and your most victorious. You understand each other, not in how you are curated on Instagram, but how you are in flesh and blood. You have a great opportunity to be countercultural, to be true hosts who can be there in the right moment with the right response to someone in need. So do it. Practice that radical hospitality in the many, many and varied ways that you can. For if you see yourselves as hosts, I think you will be surprised at how quickly it will put you in a place where your insecurities, your stresses, and your anxieties fall away, and you become the empowered, welcoming, honorable leader and servant you all are created to be. Thank you.